time now for the nationally syndicated radio show, The World of Laurie Zoock. And now, here she is, the smart, the sexy, the savvy, divine Miss C.
And welcome to the show. Now, today's going to be a fun show. I've got Danny Shedwin on the phone with me, and he's a man of many things. He's done everything. He knows everybody. And it's kind of through the miracle of Facebook that I met him because he's friends of Elmer Hopper from the Platters, who I've previously interviewed. And Elmer is friends with Glenn Zatola, who's a famous musician. And that's how kind of it has led down to me meeting you, Danny. And I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Laurie. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks. Well, let's talk. Well, you've done a lot of things. Tell me about your Lionel Hampton experiences.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Lionel was somebody that I always admired from when I was a little kid. And it was just something attractive about him, that Hey Baba Rebop or something I don't remember back in the black and white TV days. And when I got to the point in my career where I was doing documentaries, I've done Albert King, and I did Taj Mahal, and I did Lionel. Lionel was one of the few people that seemed to be in person exactly what he was on the television. What you saw is what you got. And I first chased him down and found him at his home, and we talked, and we set the event up, and then we got together and we shot the autobiography, which is still in the can, by the way. Lionel was just this great guy. I mean, he's just bigger than big, and he'd come back to town a few times, and I missed him, and then I'd show up, and he'd get on my case for not coming down and seeing him. Same thing Jerry Lee Lewis did the first time when I first met my first celebrity, and we just got an affinity for each other. And he's just total class.
Now,
all the way.
Yeah, tell me about what did you do that you got to do these documentaries with these famous people?
Well, I just rolled it over from other things that I had done in media, from radio. Then I had a publication, a periodical that I did for 10 years called the Washington State Score, and the score was oriented towards the lifestyles of people of color in Washington State. It was oriented toward the similarities instead of the differences. I was attempting to record that decade of time in the 80s for posterity so that we could see in the 90s, and now here we are in the 2000s and teens, a comparison of how life was for and between those people during that time. Well, then I rolled that print product over into video documentaries. I had done my first commercial in 1973 using Leon Hendrix, Jimi Hendrix's younger brother, and I was familiar with the medium to a degree, and I produced some other commercials over the years before I got to doing actual documentaries. But documentaries at the time were not very popular in terms of for sale, and of course they became popular as soon as I stopped doing them. It's almost the next day. Oh, we want documentaries. So I was just a little bit ahead of the time, as I'm always accused of being. So it's a tricky thing to be with these people because they are certainly careful about their security, their privacy, and such. But I had learned, mainly because of the experience that I had with Jerry Lee Lewis when I was, I think I was in middle school when I met him, a way to talk to them. And so it's a way that I used when I was reporting, and I'd always go talk to the professional athletes that the media didn't like, and I'd always get articles out of them because it was the way that I approached them. I had been an athlete myself, so I understood certain kinds of things that they wanted to talk about. And I'd been around music a lot. I went to the same junior high school boys choir that Quincy Jones went to in Bremerton, Washington. So I had a kind of a general sense of that world. And so Lionel was a real tough guy. I mean, he was a real serious guy. And I know that with people like him, that were older, a generation or two older than me, that I had to be careful in terms of how I approached him and how I got started. And he was fun. He was just a fun guy. And, he was 83, I think, when we did his doc, and I think he passed at 94, if I remember correctly. And if you were to meet Lionel, spend any time with Lionel, he takes up a big part of your heart. He was just a wonderful person, and it was just a life experience that I would be different if I hadn't gone through.
Okay. It's funny. Being a musician myself, it makes it easier for me, I think, to interview musicians than it does for someone who is not a musician, because I already understand what the driving force is behind that. So if you have some commonality with the person that you're interviewing, I think that's really key, as opposed to maybe nowadays with the media. You might research someone, but if you don't have that same feeling, that same thing in common, I don't know that it comes off quite as well in the interview or in the documentary.
Well, the way that I did my docs with these people is that I made an attempt to let them tell their own story. I would edit it in a way where I would stay totally out of it visually and audibly, if possible. If I didn't have to create some sort of bridge there to carry the story on, you weren't going to see me or hear me, because it wasn't about me. It was about those people. And my attempt was to create an atmosphere, a visual atmosphere for the viewer, like they were sitting there talking to Lionel, or they were sitting there talking to Laurie. That was most important to me, because it wasn't about me. It was about the subject that was on the screen and the person that was viewing the screen.
And I think it's also historical, especially in the terms of musicians that you were talking about. It's a historical aspect that years later you could listen to that interview and go, I can understand that musician a lot better just from listening to the interview.
It's very true. In fact, it's altogether possible that I did Albert King's last interview, because he was interested in going into teaching and no longer performing. He wanted to teach and get closer to the people and teach young people about the blues. In fact, Albert King's interview was one of the few interviews, or maybe the only interview, where the subject took the interview from me, because I never liked the blues. The blues always depressed me. And so when I was talking to Albert, I forgot his real name. Last name was Peterson. Albert King was his stage name. But when I was talking to him, I said, "Well, what is the blues?" And he said, "Have you ever been or done anything and felt badly about it?" And I said, "No." He said, "Yes, you have." I said, "No, I haven't." He took the interview right away. He said, "No, I haven't." And I said, when I was 10 years old, I went to see my great-great-grandmother in the South. She was born 1863, the year Emancipation Proclamation. And I said, I got homesick. He said, "That was the blues." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "The blues is on your heart." And when you listen to those words, it kind of changes everything, because a lot of the songs that we listen to on our devices is actually the blues, even though commercially they've got them categorized in a whole bunch of different other categories. It's the blues because it's about what's on your heart. And I totally was satisfied. I was okay with the blues. And still don't listen to it too much because it depresses me. but at least I know what it is and where it's coming from. So I'm grateful to Albert for educating me that way.
Well, let me ask you about military duty and the 7-Day War and the top secret documents. Okay, tell me about that. I'm curious about that, especially the top secret documents. Yes, what's top secret?
Well,
you're not going to get in trouble now, right?
No, because I can't remember it. I only remember the military plan was called Operation Plan 215, OP-215.
Now, you were in the military? You were in the military?
I was in the military.
Okay.
I was in the military in Berlin, Germany, which is one of the few locations where Microsoft is over there now. It was a very small village, about 4 miles outside of Stuttgart, a wonderful part of the world. And I loved it. I had a lot of fun. And I had some strange experiences where I was. I was one of the first couple of dozen guys to even get to that. It was the 7th Army Support Command, and it was a headquarters. So I worked with a captain and a lieutenant, and I remember one Saturday morning, a sunny day, just a nice spring sunny day in Germany. The front doors, the captain was gone. The executive officers was out playing with girls. The first sergeant was already down at the NCO club throwing them down. And there I was, little old me, nothing on my sleeves. and I was in the and the door flew open, and there was this calamity. And I looked up, and there was so many sparkles and stuff I could hardly see. It was the commanding general of European forces. He was the exact equivalent of General Eisenhower. He had a colonel for his aide, and our two generals were there, and it just went on and on and on and on. And there I was, little old me, and he asked me some questions, and his nickname was called Ready Teddy. This will not show up in the history books. It will not show that he was even there, because he was a real aggressive guy, real gung ho, and he did some things, and they removed him from duty. I think it was 3 weeks, and he was out of there. Well, when he left, he went down the hallway. That was a Saturday. Monday, I got a promotion, and I was told that he said, "Why isn't that guy at a higher rate?" And I got promoted. 2 weeks after that, they found a way to take it back. So, I moved.
Oh my gosh!
I moved to another department, and ultimately, over a period of time, got into the depository where they had 3,300 classified documents. I had a top secret clearance, and it had 26 combinations, 4 on the doors, 22 safes inside with classified documents, and I had to know all the combinations and change them. I think it was every 3 months. There was a frequency where I had to change them and remember all of those combinations.
I could call you secret agent man.
Something. Well, it was interesting because I was reading about classified documents. I would read about things happening in other parts of the world. It was interesting to me to discover that Americans were dying on the DMZ in Korea. This is 1967. And it was interesting to know that, 17 years after the armistice, that we were still having Americans die in Korea, and it was unreported in the news and stuff. But I lived in Esslingen, Germany, which was about 30 minutes from where I was stationed for work. And 3:30 one morning, I had a bungalow above some other people's home, a loft kind of situation. The war started, and I had to go in to open up the doors and open up the safe to give the operations plan 215, which was top secret, to the operating officers. And so I know exactly when it happened. I know exactly when I was called, and it was the 29th of May, 1967. History has it as the 2nd of June, 1967, and it was at 3:30 in the morning, which would have been the 28th of May in the States. I don't know how they got that all, but every now and then I'll see something online, and I'll contact them and say, no, you got it all wrong. If you're really concerned about it, if you're really, really concerned about it, this is what happened. I was there. I was involved in it. It was very fast. What was interesting was I remember going down to Stuttgart after it happened, and I ran into a friend that I had met when I first got over there. Hadn't seen him in a while. He was Jordanian, and he asked me, "How long do you think this war will take?" And I said, 5 or 6 days is all it's going to take. He said, "It will never end." And as we see now, realistically, when you look at it, it's still the same war.
Yeah,
still the same war.
It's still ongoing. Well, we're going to take a quick commercial break, so don't go anywhere. Back in just a second.
I'll
okay.
be right here.
Great.
Do you suffer from back, neck, or body pain? Do you suffer from migraines or have jaw or face pain? Has conventional medicine failed you? Were you injured or in an accident? Call chiropractic physician Dr. Dan Maddock at 813-935-1664. Dr. Dan has helped thousands of patients gain relief for more than 30 years. Dr. Dan is caring, gentle, and takes his time with each patient. He's also a past president of the International Craniopathic Society, a special certification of only 300 chiropractors worldwide. Dr. Dan helps patients from the neck up and the neck down. Dr. Dan accepts most insurance plans. Don't continue to live in pain. Call 813-935-1664 today. That's 813-935-1664 and get on track to better health.
Central Payment, your number one credit card merchant service provider in the industry. Providing e-commerce solutions, POS systems, standalone terminals, mobile apps, and much more. Call Central Payments James Carner at 813-777-4332. Looking for the lowest rates in the industry and number one customer service? Call Central Payments James Carner at 813-777-4332. That's James Carner, 813-777-4332.
Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Danny Shedwin, and we've been talking about his life. And he just knows everybody, knows everything. He's sharing some of his stories. Danny, tell me about life in San Remo. You have James Brown, Nino I can't even say it, Benvenuti, and the Gene Fulmer fight.
I lived in San Remo, but because I was working in the club, I rarely got out in the daytime, mostly slept in the daytime. So I never really got a chance to explore the city. I, in fact, was totally unaware that that the city was so close to the Mediterranean. I didn't know that until just a few months ago, after all these years. But the way the James Brown thing happened was that I had been told that there was a new nightclub. And one thing you have to keep in mind about Italy is that it was a two-class society, the very, very rich and the very, very poor. So a person from the United States who's used to being predominantly middle class walks around with middle class mentality, socializing with everybody. Well, they got mad at me a little bit over there, so they told me about this brand new nightclub, and I went by. So when I walked into the nightclub, the people were just literally jumping off the walls. I mean, it was popping, man, and I got in there, and it was blasting so hard. I immediately got into it. So I'm out on the floor, and I'm dancing hard, and people are just jumping around, and sweat's flying everywhere. And all of a sudden, I'm hearing James Brown say, "And I'm black and I'm proud." And James Brown keeps saying, "I'm black and I'm proud." And James Brown keeps saying, "I'm black and I'm proud." And I said, "Uh-oh, these are all white people. I'm in trouble."
Uh-oh.
So I stopped, and I went into my defensive mode to protect myself. You know, I went into my little army kung fu thing, you know, to protect myself, because
right.
I'm in a place where everybody's different color than me. This ain't about black and proud. So I got out of there, and I wrote my brother a letter, or one of my brothers a letter, asking him, you know, how's the record selling over there? And he said that they hadn't even been playing it. Well, when I finally met James Brown in August of 1974, we spent 45 minutes together. We talked about that, and he was telling me about how he was releasing his music overseas first to see how well it would do overseas, and if they did really, really well overseas, that's the way that they measured that they really had how hot it really was. I was kind of fortunate that I was over there at the time, because Hey Jude came out while I was in France, Tom Jones broke out while I was in France. I was hearing it all on the BBC, so I was okay. It was a nice experience.
All right, now tell me. Oh, actually, Lee has a question for you. He wants to backtrack on something.
Now I have other.
Go ahead. Go for it.
Yeah. Hey Jude. That was 7 minutes long on a single, right? And I think it was the biggest hit of 1969. It was a number one hit, anyways, locally where I was in Detroit. Why did you mention Hey Jude? All of a sudden?
Well, it was because of San Raymond. I knew a couple of fellows who were San Raymond had this casino, and one was from Wales and one was from London, and I got to know them through the scene, through the nightlife scene, and they were hired, according to them, to go to that casino to try to figure out a way to break the casino. And the fellow from Wales told me that the Beatles had released a brand new song, and it sold 1 million copies in the first week. That was mind-blowing in those days. I suspect it might still be mind-blowing these days, but to hear English music, I listened to the BBC. I'd gotten used to doing that when I was in Germany in the Army, and so I heard it, and I heard Tom Jones, and I was trying to figure out, if he was Afro or if he was white, and he was so good. And Engelbert was big at that time, and then James comes along with I'm Black and I'm Proud. So it was just a time. It just seemed to be a time, some sort of time period there where it all hit, and I was just there, just messing around like I always do, messing around.
Also, you piqued my interest on when you were talking about the so-called 6-Day War. Can you just explain, as you were during the break, what actually happened from your perspective as far as the timing of the 6-Day War?
Well, I was called to come in to open the safes at 3:30 in the morning on May the 29th. History, because the term that they use is that the balloon had gone up, which meant the war had started. The United States was prepared for that to happen. And the military had this operations plan, as I mentioned earlier, Operations Plan 215, that was about that part of the world. And they would check it out, and they would work it, and they were studying, different action officers were studying it and doing what they did with the classified document. So the history that I've seen has that war starting on June the 2nd of 1967. But even at 3:30 in the morning on May the 29th of 1967. In the States, it would have been the evening of May the 28th when that war actually started. Now, I did notice that in those days, things that were happening overseas, other things that were happening overseas, like the troops moving out of France, American troops moving out of France, it didn't show up in the States until 3 days later. I don't know why that was that way, but that's...
We had no internet. I mean, maybe it took that long to travel.
No cell phone cameras.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, though, how many other dates in past history were recorded incorrectly.
Well, from my perspective in those days, even the movement of the troops out of France was a classified issue, but yet it showed up on the front pages of newspapers in Europe. Even though as far as the military service was concerned, it was classified. People weren't supposed to know that. So it's all interesting how it worked and didn't work, and how everybody kind of moved along there.
You know what I find interesting is that the history books that we learn out of in the United States do not describe the same events when you study those same events in another country. Their history books say something completely different.
Amen.
It's all perspective.
It is really interesting, isn't it, how the stories over there are so different than the stories over here. And moreover, when you're overseas, for example, I remember at Christmas time in France how they showed the wound into Bobby Kennedy's head, and they also showed the infamous footage of the Vietnamese officer shooting the Vietnamese citizen in the head. And in this country, in the United States, they wouldn't show either one of those. But over there, they were just blatant part of lives. But you're talking about Germany, which was almost totally demolished just 20 years before, in World War II. So they're still pretty fresh in their minds, I suspect.
Hey, can I just ask you, how did you? I'm assuming you are acquainted or have had contact with many figures in the music business. How did you happen to run into them all?
Well, it started with Jerry Lee. I was just a middle school, and he was playing in Bremerton, Washington, at a roller rink, at a skating rink, and so I went down and to see him, and that's how I initially met him. Most of the other people, it just kind of occurred because I was in the radio business. I was doing advertising sales, but I wasn't suited to beating the pavement and going out and knocking on doors. That didn't make a lot of sense to me. In fact, what I did is I started noticing the music industry and how the sufferings of the music industry, the sufferings of the artists. I talked with people like Herbie Mann. I used to call Herbie up at home. I got Herbie's number. I kind of had a reputation for being able to find you, no matter where you went. And Herbie gave me a lot of valuable information about, from the sides of the musicians. And it just kind of got to the point where I started writing what then were illegal commercials. I turned commercials into programs. So you could only write a commercial that was a minute long, but then I started writing them 3 minutes long and 5 minutes long and calling them programs. I also may have been the first person to do, what's it called now?
An infomercial. Yeah, we're saying the same thing. Infomercials?
Yeah. Telemarketing. Okay. No, I didn't do infomercials, but telemarketing. I did my first telemarketing with an advertising agency in Portland, Oregon, for $600. And just about the time that I was finishing up my stint in radio, I put another package together with quadraphonic sound, working with Dean Shorey, who invented quadraphonic sound, who was the owner of Ovations Records and Black Jazz Records, to sell quadraphonic receivers. For that package would have been for $6,000. So within a year, it went from $600 to $6,000, and that kind of became my niche. And so working with the labels is how I started meeting so many of the artists.
Lee, you got a question for him?
Oh, yeah, probably quite a few. I'm trying to remember which one. Hey, Jerry Lee Lewis, what was it like to meet him? And this is probably very early in his career, it sounds like, or not?
No,
or was this in the 60s?
I didn't understand it myself. I never could understand it until the History Channel came out, and the History Channel showed me, they had a documentary on Jerry, and I've always wondered if Jerry would remember me, but that was that low period in his life.
Okay.
He'd fallen from grace, and he was building back up. He was going through the humble beginning kind of stages again, and he was down there playing to preteens and teenagers, and that's how he happened to be where he was at the time.
Elvis was in the Army. It looked like Jerry Lee might be able to take his place, or people were calling him the next Elvis, because you listen to those old records and his chops he was amazing. I mean, he was really good.
Absolutely. I don't see a comparison between those two at all.
They're actually different performers in a lot of ways.
Yeah, Jerry was all about energy. And what was really funny about him, the thing that I remember about him the most, was that, most artists, when they have their breaks, and and Laurie, you know this for certain, they'll go away from their acts, or they'll move away from the crowd. Jerry would just sit there. He would just sit right at his piano during his break, and then when it was time to start again, he'd start playing.
It's interesting you mention him, because back in the 80s, I was on a business trip somewhere in Tennessee. It might have been Nashville. And I was up dancing, and the fella I was dancing with said, "Oh, look in the corner over there. There's Jerry Lee Lewis and Mickey Gilley." Now, I wasn't wearing my glasses at that time, so I'm staring at them. Okay, and I see them, and they're actually there with a couple of young women and what look like bodyguards, and they're sitting next to the band. And I'm going, "No, it's not. No, it's not." Well, sure enough, the other band stopped playing, and they announced it, and Jerry Lee just got right up right there, right in front of us, and did his whole number. And I'm not sure how old he was back in the 80s, but he just was rocking and rolling. He just did his thing, and it was tremendous.
Really incredible energy. Incredible energy.
Now, tell me about life in Monaco. I'd like to hear about that.
Well, I was there playing basketball for Prince Rainier and Princess Grace, and it was kind of hard because they really didn't know how to play, and but it was a nice experience, a nice lifestyle. In fact, that's where I had the blues. I could have told Albert about that. I got the blues there, but the thing that was happening in San Remo was a part of the downtime with the basketball in Monaco. That's why I went to Rome, because there was only one other American in Monaco, and he encouraged me to go to Rome, to Cinecittà, because they were making films down there, and they were paying extras in those days. I was told about $230 a day for half a day. That was a lot of money in those days for just being, working half a day. So from Monaco, they had an overnight train. It was perfect. You got on the train at night, went to bed, you woke up in the morning, you were in Rome. And I ultimately met with and interviewed a guy went by the name of Fernando Piazza. And Fernando Piazza had done this film with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, The August to Be Fourth. And that was... the film was called Boom, and so Fernando had gotten he'd risen into that tier because of Boom, and I went back to Monaco. He didn't respond. I sent him a letter. He said, "Well, you're not going to be okay for the film." It didn't make sense to me because the film was called Games. It was with Ryan O'Neal, and it was just about the 1960 games. Well, I was an athlete, and all I would have been doing was running around the track as a runner. So it was easy money, but I couldn't figure out why that didn't transpire. I found out about 8 months ago why.
Okay.
And this is January '69. I looked up Fernando online and found out that he had passed on. I think about 2009, something like that. And I found out that Fernando had played in, I can't remember the name of the film, Ron O'Neal.
Okay.
Superfly. He had played in Superfly. And I'm saying, wait a minute. This guy is Ethiopian, Italian immigrant, over here in the States playing in Superfly. Well, when I met him, he had this kind of turban-like hat on. And that's what he wore in the film Boom. When I saw his picture in Superfly, I immediately knew why I didn't get the job with the film in Italy.
Okay.
We looked like brothers. We almost looked like twins. And having been a model and doing that stuff for a number of years, I can see where somebody would say, he'll cost me jobs because we looked like twins. I was shocked because he didn't have his turban on in the.
You could have been his double. It sounds like.
Exactly. So, but Monaco was cool. I met the prince once. I never met Grace. She would drive by and she would just stare at me. She just not stare, but look at me.
Well, you're handsome. You're handsome. I see your pictures of you on Facebook now. You're very handsome.
Well, I don't know. I don't think about that. But it wasn't that. Before I got ready to go back, I had an offer come to me through the players that the Prince offered for me to stay and coach little children. Not knowing what I know about females today, if I had known that, I would have known that actually it was coming from Grace, because she did take care of her own people. I was there when she took care of Josephine Baker. I don't exactly know what happened, but Josephine Baker had some problems, and Grace brought her down to La Côte d'Azur and hooked her up and kind of took care of Josephine Baker. They were asking me about Josephine Baker. I had no idea who she was. and I'd never heard that name, and they kind of looked at me kind of odd.
Famous jazz singer Shea Josephine. They have at least they used to have a club restaurant in New York City. I don't know if it still exists though.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just didn't know
at that time, right?
And then plus I was transitioning out of the military back to the States, and the States coming back to the States from Germany was like culture shock, because all the when I left, all my friends and stuff were Ivy League, penny loafers, and I come back to the States, and they have beards down to their thighs and hair down their back covering their butt, and I'm supposed to recognize these guys. And that whole culture had hit this country, and I was in shock. That's the main reason I didn't stay over there. I wanted to come back because I was concerned about my country, and then I got back and found out that it was a trend and that it was disappearing, and that was really upsetting to me.
It sounds like it. Now, share with me. You gave me a note. Father's Secret Prayer. What is that?
Father's Secret Prayer is something that occurred to me, and it's based upon the fact of fathers not being in the homes where there are children, and the way that this country kind of looks at it, it's kind of looks at it kind of flat, like, well, the guys aren't there because of this, that, and the other. They're bad guys, and blah 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 blah. That is true also, but there are a lot of really good men who've been removed from the homes for one reason or another at one time or another, that couldn't get back into their homes, no fault of their own. A Father's Secret Prayer is for those guys who are put in the same bin as the deadbeat guys, who have the biggest prayer that they have in their life is to be able to hold their children. And so that campaign is a person-to-person campaign that I started 3 or 4 years ago out here to pass those brochures or posters along to encourage those good fathers to try to find a way, any way that they can, to get back to their children and strengthen their families.
So what are the things that you do now? It sounds like you're still active now. I've seen your photography on Facebook. You do things.
Well, I'm a human doing, and I try to stop, and as soon as I try to stop, I plug something else in because there's a vacancy there. And I think you're kind of like that, because I see the hours. I see the hours of some of your Facebook postings.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm an insomniac. I can't. I'm not someone who can just relax or take it easy and not do anything. I'm not a TV watcher. I'm more of a doer and a learner. And so you see my posting sometimes late in the like very late in the evening, because I'm up on my iPad reading, and then I'll post things. But yeah, I have to do. I can't just sit. I feel like if I'm sitting, I'm not contributing to society. And so I want to do something that contributes to society.
You just defined me. I wonder if it's the radio in you, because we both have that background. The radio is second by second. We live in the seconds, not in the minutes or the hours or the days. It's
right.
Seconds.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do the same thing. I think we're a lot alike in that way, that you have some type of a message, but you seem to have been, I don't know, you're gifted in the sense that you've met a lot of famous people and have all these experiences that the average person never would even have.
That's what people say to me. I never look at it like that. I just look at it like I'm just messing around, because to me, I'm just messing around. And I've kind of always been that way. I just meet people. I've had family members ask me, well, how do you meet these people? And I don't know. It's just the way my life has worked. It's never been a pursuit. And I don't approach them for money. I never approach them for money. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm mostly interested in learning, learning a little bit more about their true story. I got a chance to talk to Larry Doby. Now, I did pursue Larry Doby. I was really interested in talking to Larry Doby, and just for your listening audience, he was the second Afro-American to play Major League Baseball for Cleveland. Cleveland's a hot name right now. And I found him in a funny way. I was talking to Emmett Bryant is a friend of mine. Emmett Bryant was a point guard for Boston Celtics when they beat the Los Angeles Lakers in 1969, and he's been a friend of mine since 1974 when he was an assistant coach for the Seattle Supersonics up here, along with Bill Russell and Bob Hopkins. And I kind of lost track of where I was there.
Well, but meeting all these people that you have met.
Well, Larry Doby was very interesting to me because he came into the major leagues 13 weeks after Jackie Robinson. So there was enough proximity there. We know the Jackie Robinson story, but we didn't know the Larry Doby story. And then Larry Doby came into the American League, and Jackie Robinson came into the National League. And I'm trying to think of that guy. I can't remember the guy's name that told me that he was working for the New York Knicks, which was interesting. So I got to Larry through the New York Knicks, and we talked for 3 hours. It was shortly after the Million Man March, which was 1996, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Because
Larry told me that he was going to be the 50th anniversary of him going into the major leagues would have been 1997. And he told me a very interesting story about baseball and himself, and how he had changed his whole persona because he was, as a child, picked cotton in the cotton fields and that sort of thing. And he talked about how he had stayed away from that all those years, and that recently he started to incorporate that part of his story, or that part of his life in his story, when he would be lecturing to students in the classroom. And very interesting guy. So I was more interested in that part of stuff about how they overcame the obstacles, how they got along with the stupid stuff, and how they overlooked so that they could continue to grow. It wasn't about their celebrity status; it was about the conquest that they had, the personal conquest.
Well, that's the interesting part, and why I like doing the show when I'm interviewing somebody, is to find out what is it that makes them tick. What
Exactly.
makes them who they are, and also, like yourself, you're a walking history book of all these different things, meeting all these people. Even if you're not famous, you still have had a lot of interaction with these people, where it just seems like, almost in a way, God said, "Hey, let's let Danny meet everybody," and be able to do something positive, like you did with documentaries or things in the media. So I find the historical perspective of interviewing people to really be fascinating.
Well, I've resisted Facebook for a long time, and as you know, I probably started getting on it about 3 months ago. And one of the first people I encountered, and I can't remember his name, but I really, really want a conversation with this fellow. He's seen it all. He's seen it all, even to the point that I believe now, and I may be a little inaccurate here, that he was the one that was ringing the bell when Emil Griffith beat up Benny Kid Paret, and Benny Kid Paret died. And he was the guy who was ringing the bell to stop the fight. He's seen it. I mean, he's been that far in there. And I don't know how they can just let this man walk around without talking to him, because he did that. He was involved in the early days in the 60s of the NBA. He's just full of accurate inside stuff. The stuff that
you're not going to hear somewhere else. Yeah.
No one's seen it like he's seen it. Nobody. So he got away from me on Facebook, and I know how to get him back, because if I can talk Emmett Bryant out of it, because Emmett is a fascinating individual, and incredible humanitarian. He's a giant. He's a giant, and just somebody that, one of those kind of people that nobody has anything bad to say about.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Facebook is interesting in that, I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook, because I see people around it all the time. I don't know, it's a little too much in that respect for me. I usually look maybe in the morning, and then maybe once in the evening, and then when I can't sleep, I go on and I see what everybody's posted and that kind of stuff. But what I've found, though, is I've met people, like I'm meeting you. I met you through Elmer Hopper, who I met through Glenn Zatola, who I already knew. But when it comes to interviewing guests, I found, now I haven't had any, famous like acting celebrities, for example, but I read a lot of good books. And if I find a book to be so interesting, it's real easy now on the internet to contact the author. So I've had a number of authors on my show where I get to kind of pick their brain, because after I read a topic, once I feel like I've got a handle on a topic, I have to research that topic. Then I contact the author and I drop an outline of questions of things that maybe I want further explanation of. So in a way, I want it to be interesting to the listener, but also it helps me just better educate myself.
That's the whole deal. When I was a child, preteen, people used to always say I was nosy, and I'd get mad. I said, I'm not nosy, but I didn't know a word for it. I'm just curious, and so when I went to college, I thought, well, I'll certainly solve all that. And of course, it made it worse, because all of a sudden there was all these other holes that I didn't know what was in there. And I started exploring all that other stuff. So it just kind of goes on and on and on. I just have that curiosity. But I'm trying to remember the name of the guy that told me that Larry Doby worked for the Knicks. I can't remember his name. Last name was Reed. Willis Reed.
Okay.
He was the famous basketball player for New York in 1968 when they won the championship. Willis Reed. I knew it would come.
You know a lot of stuff. Well, tell me, what do you do now? Tell me about your photography. That's so beautiful.
Well, I'm a photo impressionist, and I've never really taken a snapshot. What I'm saying is that I might take an image. I might see a fingerprint, and it might just be something that I've never looked at before. So I might pop it off with a real camera, or pop it off with my cellular phone camera, and then take it and put it in the computer and start wondering what it would look like if I changed it. And so I start manipulating it architecturally, manipulating it psychologically, manipulating it in my own personal visual jazz form, until I get to a point where I might have stretched it and rolled it and twisted it until it hits that certain point where it's me, and then I stop. So many people say to me, well, how come you don't post your picture on Facebook, or how come your picture's not out there? I said, it is. And they said, well, I don't know what you look like. I said, well, when you look at one of my images, then you know exactly what I look like, because that's me.
Yeah, you have I'm looking at one right now, actually. You have a beautiful one of a sunset where it looks like you've altered it. The yellow, the colors look like they've been watercolor painted.
Well, that's the object that I try to do. I try to take them, since I'm not a photographer, and photography is very technical. I'm not a photographer. I'm in my own space, so I try to take them and actually move them over into more of a impressionistic kind of appearance. Is that the one with the sun ray?
Yes, that's the one. That's the one. It looks like a sunset. And there's and there's one before that. That looks like a tree. You're shooting up at an angle to the tree on the side to frame the shot, and then you've got the blue sky and the big white clouds. And it's not at your normal angle, but it's an interesting photo to look at.
Well, I was laying on the ground. That was the one with the sun ray. That one's kind of interesting, because that sun ray actually comes from 60 miles away. To just give you an idea of how intense that was. And the next frame, it was gone. I just happened to catch that. So I don't. The difference between what I do and what photographers do is photographers go out looking for shots or looking to set up shots. I shoot what's right there.
Right.
I was walking with a fella, and he said, "Well, how do I know what to shoot?" And there were some feathers on the ground, the bird feathers that had kind of like little polka dots. I'm going to use the term polka dots.
Okay.
And I said, "Well, shoot that." And he said, "Why would I shoot that?" And I went down and I pulled my phone out and I shot it, And then when I manipulated later on, he couldn't imagine what I possibly could have been thinking about. Things don't have to be in the world of art what they are. They can be what you want them to be.
They can, but you have to think differently. You know, some people are creative, some people are logic, and a few are both. But if you have that creative aspect to you, which clearly you do, I think that's a benefit, and it shows in your pictures. Now, I want to thank you. We're running out of time. I would like to have you back because I had a lot more questions for you. So I'd like to do a part 2 maybe in a few weeks, if that's okay. And
yeah, just let me know, Laurie.
I will do that. And, yep, if anyone wants to contact you, how can they get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me, of course, on Facebook, Danny Shedwin on Facebook. They can also send an email to DannyShedwin@yahoo.com.
Sounds good. Thanks so much again for joining me, Danny, and we'll see you next week on The World of Laurie Zoock.
Do you suffer from back, neck, or body pain? Do you suffer from migraines or have jaw or face pain? Has conventional medicine failed you? Were you injured or in an accident? Call chiropractic physician Dr. Dan Maddock at 813-935-1664. Dr. Dan has helped thousands of patients gain relief for more than 30 years. Dr. Dan is caring, gentle, and takes his time with each patient. He's also a past president of the International Craniopathic Society, a special certification of only 300 chiropractors worldwide. Dr. Dan helps patients from the neck up and the neck down. Dr. Dan accepts most insurance plans. Don't continue to live in pain. Call 813-935-1664 today. That's 813-935-1664 and get on track to better health.
Central Payment, your #1 credit card merchant service provider in the industry. Providing e-commerce solutions, POS systems, standalone terminals, mobile apps, and much more. Call Central Payments James Carner at 813-777-4332. Looking for the lowest rates in the industry and #1 customer service? Call Central Payments James Carner at 813-777-4332. That's James Carner, 813-777-4332.